Picture World War I. Everyone knee-deep in mud, dodging shells and inventing fresh swear words for soggy boots. If you've ever watched a war movie, you probably picture the entire Western Front as one endless trench, infested with rats, lice, and mud, thick enough to swallow a general's horse, and maybe a few war plans too. The myth? That WWI was all trenches, where soldiers never left their slimy ditches, unless it was for a tea break or an artillery barrage. But here's the muddy, or occasionally not so muddy, truth. Beyond trench misery, WWI had dashing cavalry charges, swirling dogfights in the sky, and naval battles that made the ocean flinch. On the Eastern Front, wide-open maneuvering made no man's land look cramped. Gallipoli? More sand in your boots than mud. Ships, tanks, and even almost skydiving pigeons fought everywhere mud couldn't reach. Trench foot became iconic, but it was just a soggy footnote in the world's biggest, messiest conflict. While the war is often thought of as static trench warfare, moments like the Christmas truce reveal brief pauses in the fighting across some fronts. Picture this: battle-hardened soldiers on the Western Front suddenly ditching rifles to swap chocolates, belt out Stille Nacht, and maybe kick off an impromptu football match. Is the Christmas truce of 1914 really one giant, spontaneous block party stretching from the English Channel to the Alps? It's a heartwarming image, but about as historically accurate as Santa's elves steering the Belgian midfield. Legend has it the entire war hit pause for caroling and camaraderie. The truth? Most truces popped up only between British and German troops in select sectors. If you were hoping for a Turkish soprano serenading Russians near Gallipoli, prepare for disappointment. Commanders were about as eager as a Grinch at a Christmas concert. Soldiers caught fraternizing faced serious court-martials. Sometimes, the truce amounted to little more than a quick cigarette swap, not a festive sing-along. Sure, a few footy matches happened, but there was no epic multinational Christmas Cup. By 1915, generals slammed the brakes on the seasonal ceasefire. Who knew that even in war, crashing a Christmas party could be so complicated? The only thing widespread that December? Awkward small talk in a ghastly mashup of Franco-German English. Despite such ceasefires, many soldiers were enlisted through various means, not all strictly voluntary. Picture thousands of surly peasants yanked from their potato patches and dumped into muddy trenches. Was every WT soldier really dragged kicking and screaming into uniform? Cue tragic violin music and tales of teary farewells. But hold on a second. The common myth insists every W2 soldier was conscripted, basically drafted at gunpoint while wondering about lost root vegetables. In reality, recruitment was a strange cocktail of patriotism and, well, pragmatism. Conscription certainly happened. Draft notices were about as welcome as a rain cloud on picnic day. But voluntary enlistment was booming too. In the US, roughly 38% of the armed forces were eager volunteers, the kind who might actually have liked those snappy uniforms. Across the Atlantic, Britain's 1939 recruitment rush saw volunteers flooding in before conscription even kicked off. Soviets? Draft, yes, but the first waves included crowds genuinely fired up. It's hard not to be motivated with Nazis at the door. Japanese recruits? Many conscripted, but plenty raced in for glory, emperor worship, or to dodge chores at home. So next time Uncle Bob swears he was forced into uniform, watch for the twinkle in his eye when he mentions the free Navy ice cream. Turns out, gun to the head is only part of the story, and Grandpa probably enjoyed telling the gloomier version a bit too much. These conscripted soldiers faced deadly weapons on the battlefield, with the machine gun being particularly lethal. Picture a trench, some mud, and a weapon that ate bullets for breakfast. Enter the machine gun, the so-called Grim Reaper of World War I. Before the Great War, battles looked more like a Napoleonic cosplay convention than Call of Duty. Brightly colored uniforms, rifles, and enough synchronized marching to make a TikTok choreographer weep. Now here's the myth. The machine gun single-handedly transformed warfare, mowing down armies like a scythe through wheat. Admit it, mowing sounds fun until you're stuck with lawn duty. But don't be fooled by the catchy nickname. Early machine guns were about as portable as a grand piano and jammed just as often as your old printer. Operating one often required a whole team, weightlifting included, no extra charge. Still, when coordinated and aimed at advancing enemies, these clunky bullet hoses turned open fields into no man's land. They played a starring role in the stalemate, Though let's give credit where it's due. If the machine gun was the Grim Reaper, artillery was the architect sketching blueprints for the afterlife. Survivors quickly learned that charging headfirst was a terrible idea. Thus, the infamous over-the-top orders and the rise of global trenchancy. By war's end, every army wanted more machine guns than socks, though both got just as gloriously grimy in the trenches. In addition to machine guns, new technologies like tanks emerged and changed battlefield dynamics over time. Forget Hollywood's hype. The first tanks weren't exactly unstoppable war machines. Think less Terminator on treads and more Metal Turtle having a bad day. Contrary to movie magic, popular belief claims tanks stormed World War I like invincible bulldozers. Unstoppable, invincible, and dare we say, stylish. Reality, as always, crashes the blockbuster party. Those early tanks? Slow, creaky, and hilariously unreliable. They shuffled across battlefields at grandma on a morning stroll speed, frequently getting stuck in anything softer than concrete. Picture your car breaking down in the rain. Now swap the rain for trenches, mud, and a hailstorm of bullets. Delightful, right? Inside, crews endured rattling metal, choking smoke, and sauna-level heat, basically a noisy, leaky oil furnace on wheels. Sure, the first tanks terrified enemy soldiers, but tactically, more spectacle than solution. It took years of trial and error for these death traps to graduate from dramatic oil leaks to actual game changers. But hey, even legends need to crawl before they roll. Although tanks were significant, the war's conclusion came at a specific moment, rather than through immediate dominance of any one weapon. Picture this, the ultimate deadline. November 11, 1918, at exactly 11 a.m., the world's most punctual ceasefire. If only rush hour traffic stopped as promptly as World War I did, now that'd be a miracle. The paperwork was signed in a French train carriage long before dawn. But don't imagine a dawn chorus of spontaneous hugs. Nope, both sides kept slugging it out right up to the very last second, because nothing screams official like synchronized pocket watches paired with synchronized artillery barrages. Millions celebrated the armistice as the news blasted across front pages. But for soldiers in the trenches, the clock ticked down with deadly seriousness. Some commanders, either overachievers or just hard of hearing, ordered last-minute offensives, resulting in tragic, utterly unnecessary casualties mere minutes before peace crashed the party. When 11 struck, the guns, mostly, went silent, leaving behind relief, exhaustion, and perhaps the world's most awkwardly appreciated pause. The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month became immortal, partly because it's catchy, and partly because it finally meant tea time for the British. One small catch. Real peace had to wait for the Treaty of Versailles, history's grandest, most bittersweet pause button. At war's end, it is important to recognize that not only men served at the front lines. Picture the trenches of World War I, mud, mayhem, and magnificent mustaches. But was frontline combat really an exclusive gentleman's club? A mustache-twirling, strictly no girls allowed kind of affair? Legend claims only men fought on the front lines, while women stuck to knitting socks and nervously awaiting telegrams. Society and military brass insisted women stay on the sidelines, and at least on paper, they were barred from combat like muddy boots at a posh tea party. Yet reality wore a false mustache. Some women sneaked past regulations by impersonating men. Maria Bochkareva boldly led Russia's Women's Battalion of Death. No pressure. While British nurse Flora Sandys swapped bedpans for bayonets with the Serbian army. If there was ever a shortage of fake facial hair and grit, just thank these trailblazers. Women also held the lines as medics, spies, and couriers, often only discovered when wounded or after snagging a medal. No man's land? More like mostly men's land, with a handful of surprise guests. Today, historians admit the gender line in the trenches was about as straight as a dugout after heavy shelling. Moreover, the forces fighting included many nationalities beyond just British, French, or German troops. Imagine the trenches echoing not with gunfire, but with British stiff upper lips, French existential sighs, and German philosophical musings. If only Britain, France, and Germany were involved, World War I would have felt more like an oversized pub debate. Less mud, more Nietzsche quotes, and probably a lot more tea. Popular myth has it that the whole war was just Britain, France, and Germany duking it out over who crafted the best mustache wax. In reality, by 1918, those trenches teemed with soldiers from over 30 nations, spanning every continent except Antarctica, where penguins, ever the pacifists, remained honorably unconscripted, preserving the continent's undefeated war record. The British and French empires didn't just bring accents, they brought millions: Indians, Canadians, Australians, Vietnamese, Senegalese. You name it, someone fought in their uniform. Russia wrestled, and then revolutionized, the Eastern Front, while Americans barged in fashionably late, pockets stuffed with optimism. Even tiny Serbia, Belgium, and Portugal punched way above their weight. So next time someone calls WWI a mere European family spat, remember? Somewhere, an Australian or Senegalese veteran is spinning in his grave, almost certainly with better rhythm than any Viennese waltz. While various nations fought, it is a misconception that chemical weapons caused the majority of casualties. Gas masks, World War I's ultimate trench chic accessory, or just glorified panic goggles. Picture shell-shocked Tommies looking like dystopian scuba divers, icons of nightmares, history books, and Halloween parties alike. The myth? Poison gas swept Europe, leaving endless rows of ghostly survivors in its toxic wake. Hollywood calls it horror couture. Truth bomb. Chemical weapons were outgunned, literally, by high-explosive shells and machine guns. If you're keeping score, poison gas claimed less than 1% of WWI deaths. Statistically, you were more likely to be felled by a bad stew than bad gas. Soldiers sometimes feared their own socks more than a mustard gas cloud, thank you very much. Sure, gas caused chaos, the coughing fits, the panic, and the sudden need to don a mask clearly designed by someone allergic to noses. But gas scared far more than it slaughtered. Gas masks? Excellent for survival, terrible for trench romance, while explosives took home MVP honors. Beyond the dangers of chemical weapons, animals played diverse and vital roles beyond just being mascots or cavalry mounts. Imagine Napoleon charging into battle, not with cannons roaring, but flanked by a fluffy brigade of bunnies and a goat wearing a face that clearly says, "Wait, I didn't sign up for this." You might assume animals in war were just for show, or at best, a stylish steed for armored knights. But the idea that these creatures were mere show ponies, or well, goats, is about as sturdy as a chocolate cannonball. In truth, our ancestors drafted every critter imaginable for the heavy lifting. Dogs dashed off messages at breakneck speeds and sniffed out explosives with the precision of tiny, fur-covered detectives. Homing pigeons pulled off covert ops, slipping past enemy lines and saving countless lives with their feathered fortitude. Elephants? They were crushing it, literally, long before tanks rolled onto the scene, trampling infantry and enemy morale alike. So next time someone claims animals in war were just for the portrait, remind them, medieval cheer squads didn't include bomb-sniffing bees or deep-diving war dolphins. And if that goat was just morale-boosting, why did the camp go into full meltdown when someone accidentally roasted the flag bearer? The varied experiences of soldiers included many psychological effects, although not every soldier suffered shell shock. Ever heard someone say, "Every soldier got shell shock"? If that were true, the trenches would have looked less like battlefields and more like muddy group therapy sessions. But while war was undeniably horrific, not every soldier marched home with the psychological equivalent of a car crash. The myth stomps on that every WWI combatant developed shell shock, or, with a flair for medical melodrama, war neurosis. In reality, shell shock affected about 1 in 10 British soldiers. Sure, plenty more returned rattled, with nightmares and frayed nerves, but not everyone signed up for the full explosive package. Symptoms ranged from trembling hands to memory blackouts, yet some soldiers came home sharper than your average aunt, knowing exactly where their keys were and remembering all the relatives' birthdays. Back then, doctors were guessing as much as diagnosing, sometimes mistaking trauma for cowardice. So ducking didn't just save you from bullets, it might have saved your sanity too. War was brutal, but the psychological toll, while devastating, wasn't a universal souvenir. While many threats loomed, U-boats impacted the war primarily through targeting vessels, extending beyond just military targets. Picture this: Shadowy submarines playing hide-and-seek beneath the waves, surfacing only to torpedo menacing battleships. Sounds dramatic, right? The classic tale casts German U-boats as underwater knights, dueling other warships in a silent, steely ballet. But here's where the periscope swings back to reality. These knights had appetites far less chivalrous and decidedly more piratical. Anything afloat was fair game: rusty freighters, lumbering tankers, and for variety, the occasional passenger liner. Merchant ships hauling everything from tea to toilet paper were prime targets, because what better way to strangle Britain's vital supply lines? Amid all the cannons and brass, some of history's greatest tragedies, the Lusitania and Athenia among them, happened to unarmed civilian vessels. Unrestricted submarine warfare wasn't just a military tactic, it was a diplomatic dumpster fire. Torpedoing tea and tourists did wonders for Germany's rep as heroic knights. Said no one ever. Soon enough, U-boats earned their spot as graphic novel villains. Just add a twirled mustache and cue the ominous organ music. In addition, America's involvement was influential, but it did not instantly end the war overnight. Did the U.S. burst onto the scene, flex its muscles, and make Germany swoon into surrender in 1917? Not quite. The legend goes, Uncle Sam strutted onto the battlefield, the Germans caved instantly, and peace was declared faster than you could say Yankee Doodle Dandy. Reality? Far from it. By the time America jumped into WWI, Europe was already 3 years deep in a grim relay race of mud, misery, and casualty lists longer than a fraternity pizza order. When U.S. soldiers, affectionately dubbed doughboys, finally showed up, they first had to figure out which way to point their rifles, let alone turn the tide. Supplies did trickle in from U.S. factories, but logistics, never the war hero's swagger, meant the impact was more molasses than miracle. Germany's collapse was about battered armies, empty bellies, and a nation that had run out of oomph, not a mere parade of fresh American faces. So that overnight victory? Turns out overnight was more like a 19-month hangover. Someone should have handed Vietnam the memo. Following America's entry, formal agreements such as the Treaty of Versailles sought to conclude the conflict globally. Did the Treaty of Versailles slam the door on World War I parties everywhere, or just leave a few guests awkwardly lingering by the punch bowl? Popular lore paints Versailles as the grand mic drop, an international "that's all, folks," to a devastating war. But history, ever the plot twist, tells a different story. While Versailles put a bow on Germany and most allies' farewells in 1919, other former Central Powers kept the treaty party going. Austria, Hungary, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, each had to sign extra agreements with names so twisty they double as tongue twisters. Try spelling Trianon or Neuilly before your morning coffee without a stumble. Russia, having clocked out early thanks to revolution, and maybe to perfect their borscht recipe, missed the RSVP list entirely. Meanwhile, the U.S., ever the wild card, nixed Versailles and penned its own peace deals later. Solo, like any classic American sequel. So, while Versailles looked like the ultimate mic drop, it was really just WWI, the extended cut. The war only officially wrapped up decades later, proving treaties, like diets, thrive on loopholes and leftovers. Even after treaties, protective measures like gas masks were essential, though they did not guarantee full safety from chemical attacks. Imagine facing toxic gases armed with nothing but a glorified pig snout strapped to your face. That, dear reader, was World War I soldiers' grim reality. Portraits show them wearing gas masks with the bravado of someone about to win a costume contest, not dodge death. Legend has it these masks turned poison gas into a harmless breeze, bravely blocking chlorine and mustard gas. The truth? Early gas masks were slapdash affairs, about as reliable as a damp sock for a helmet, awkward, claustrophobic, and fogging up just when the chaos peaked. Here's the punchline. As new chemical cocktails hit the front lines faster than fashion trends, masks lagged behind, filtering less and failing more. Sloppy storage and bad fits made masks about as useful as goggles with holes. Civilian masks, especially for kids, were basically colanders playing dress-up as lifesavers. If gas masks worked miracles, World War I surely wouldn't have smelled like defeat. Survival, it turns out, was far messier than any propaganda poster suggested. Importantly, World War I also spurred technological advances, contradicting the belief that none resulted from the conflict. Think World War I was nothing but mud, mustaches, and miserable stalemate? Think again, but please, leave the rusty entrenching tool in the shed. The trenches might have looked like a soggy dead end, but desperation didn't just inspire invention, it strapped on a rocket pack. Take the tank. Not merely a clunky, noise-polluting headache for generals and mechanics alike, it was the breakthrough beast that smashed trench warfare's dull, muddy gridlock. And aviation? Those early flying machines were flimsy enough to make paper planes look state-of-the-art, until they morphed into ruthless dogfighters. Kudos to war nerds, your weekend air shows are basically WWI's party trick. Then there's chemical warfare. Not just a terrifying debut, but the unlikely catalyst for new medical fields, and oddly enough, future skincare lines. Meanwhile, wireless communications and cryptic code breaking were busy laying the groundwork for tomorrow's spy thrillers. War might be hell, but it sure was an innovation playground. Buckle up, WWI's next act is just getting started.